But really good work doesn't really even need a plot.
She's like, I live in Nancy Street. I was like, I'm on board for this.
I was watching the Woody Allen video and was talking about this movie.
All it has to do is make you think.
Or make you feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Feel or think, or stimulate your somehow. It doesn't have to be plot-wise. It could be a beautiful scene.
Right.
For a woman. And like Woody Allen was talking about in this interview on YouTube, not YouTube, on Basta.
Yeah.
Somebody asked him if is the movie Match Point similar to the themes of crimes and misdemeanors. He said they're both love stories in a sense, but crimes and misdemeanors is about God and man. If there's no ultimate judgment, you commit a crime. It's an existential idea. You're accountable only to yourself. And if you can live with yourself, fine. If you can't do it. But there's no higher.
There's no higher moral authority.
Right. So, but he didn't see Match Point that. He said it was more about luck. How we don't realize how much luck plays a part in everybody's life. And, it's not really completely control, but a lot of it's just fate. Not fate. Luck.
Right.
Chance.
My friends, greetings. Once again, here we are, roving around, looking for ideas to discuss. But in fact, there are too many ideas and not enough time. So if you don't mind, I'll get right to it. It goes without saying, and I've probably said this in the past, that one of the things that is very important for me in the discussion of any artistic form, whether it's the book medium, the print medium of print, music, film, theater, is the same reason that the creators of many of these works are motivated to create these works, and that is because they want to shed an important sidelight on what it is to be human, to have questions, to live with doubt, to try and understand the world in some way that in some manner reflects back to who you are, and that, if possible, says something to you about why you're here and who you are. One of the problems with living in the world, as I see it, is that we are not in a world in which everything is easily defined and just falls into a type or a category that is always constantly familiar. I think that the world of the 1940s was probably a lot like that, because there were fewer social and economic and other sorts of experiments out there, so that it was easier for things to fall into traditional conventions and family structures, relationship structures, work structures, social structures were more, I think, well-defined and more common and more regular. And because of that, it was possible, I think, to imagine the world you were living in as something that, by a certain age, if you'd lived in it for a little while, you would already have been able to say you knew it. That when you got a certain educational direction or professional, career, vocational direction, when you understood yourself to be of a certain social status, for example, that in fact, in all these cases, you were already defined, you were already there, and that your life was going to largely be identified. If you were going to look into the middle class, you were already going to have your ambitions set out for you. You were going to look for a way to get a certain job that was okay, pay that was okay, find your mate, get your family, buy your house, the usual sort of milestone goals that define the middle class. And if instead, on the other hand, you were going to be someone who was going to be an artist, for example, you know that in large part those goals would have to be forestalled, put off, or maybe taken away altogether, whatnot, and that they were in fact going to be less important to you than the ability to feel the vibrant energy of creation that you were now going to become committed to you needed to give up the house in order to be able to say that all of your energy goes into the problem of creating new work, new projects. Of course, if it was going to be a belief system based around something other than that, for example, that you were going to be let go and that you were now in life, you were going to be a hobo, you were going to be involved in very few real directions in life, and that your upbringing involved rejection, lack of access, few opportunities, and some healthy amount of self-loathing, if you like, then your life was not going to include creative directions and was not going to include the possibility of being able to even feel entitled to go after middle-class pursuits like homes and careers and children, etc. So I mention all this because today the situation is much more, of course, fluid and complicated than that. One's ability to be able to acquire anything in life is often a funky combination of all these things, so that it's possible to imagine yourself having a middle-class existence and looking for the things that define a successful middle class on the one hand, while at the same time feeling like maybe your job is pretty fragile, the social contract isn't out there anymore, and somehow in a short period of time you might not have that job anymore. That things are okay, but the minute that you aggravate the employer, or that the economic conditions change ever so little, somehow you're going to be considered surplus labor, and now you're out there. Conversely, I know many people who are successful artists who, for their own part, really do feel that it is within their means, despite the demands of their creative endeavor, to have the car, have the house, have the family, and have the middle-class existence that the artistic class never felt it could acquire. I mean, I certainly grew up, as you might know, in New York City in the 1970s, when artists were people who were struggling and living in the strangest parts of town that nobody ever wanted to have anything to do with, the Lower East Side, Soho, etc. And they were living in lofts and strange spaces, and they didn't have any money. So nobody ever thought about actually having a house and kids and all that. So those are considerations for that class, for that way of life. And as I say, all these profiles, all these patterns, and all these expectations have been kind of torn asunder. And today, you just can't look at one person and their life as a way of imagining what yours might be like. It just is very difficult. I mean, you may have gone to the exact same school, you may have had the same job, and you may even have grown up together. And yet, it's not unlikely that you might have a very different life from your friend, your neighbor, your colleague. Because today the world is so quickly reconfigurable that any small decision can lead to a very big change in your life. That is in large part, of course, by design, since you can have many different choices of career and many different choices of car, for example, than before. And it's not considered sort of a loser deal. For example, rather than having a big station wagon, what you're going to do is go and have like a little moped, or maybe just even choose to bike around because you want to keep the green footprint of the world in some healthy vitality. So, just because someone says I don't have a car doesn't mean that they don't have the money to have a car. I know many people who are very well off and don't have cars. It's really crazy. So you just can't judge anything. It's a very strange world in that sense. And so, can you really blame anybody in a world such as this then, when if we are surrounded by things that no longer give us the kinds of patterns that we could look to and easily judge, define, maybe even discriminate about the world, and suddenly everything is a data point among many, and any profile, any way of living could be yours and theirs and anybody else's. I mean, can you really blame people for being somewhat confused and having questions about what am I supposed to really do now? There doesn't seem to be any security. oh sure, I'll go off and try to become a doctor. And doctors today are being laid off. So it's a strange world, and they're being sued for all kinds of malpractice. There's many problems. There are no real solutions. There's only ever questions. And so it seems to me that when people have a certain degree of frustration about those kinds of things, one of the things they tend to do is either hunker down and then not really do much, which is very much, I think, kind of a profile of the younger class or the younger generation. They wonder themselves, okay, what are we going to do? We don't really know what to do, so they kind of just wait around. Or sometimes if they're really super frustrated, as certain people of, for example, often the lower class or the lower middle class are in many parts of the world, many parts of the United States, they tend to look to extremes to imagine a world in which, with extreme behavior, you can find an enemy, you can define a problem, and you can imagine a direction toward a solution that is less confusing. The thing about being extreme is that it gives you a kind of comfort about the way of the world, and if you believe it enough, it's going to be right in your own mind. Extreme behavior generally tends to be very much a kind of, in my view, laziness, because it's a kind of refusal to engage the world on its own contemporary and very complicated terms. All I have to do is think that there's a conspiracy by the man to keep certain people down, and suddenly everything becomes very simple. I have to fight against this. There's no doubt that corporations are doing the things that corporations are doing. They always were doing those, and you have to fight them in certain kinds of ways, etc. And in a way, maybe that's what Occupy Wall Street was when it started up. But nonetheless, the big problem, the larger problem, is that those kinds of extremes may change your behavior and outlook in the world, but they don't necessarily improve your life. They don't improve anybody else's life. I've discovered that, sort of extreme thinking is no real long-term solution to anything. It's just a way of looking at the world that, in fact, has the ironic effect of keeping things very much the same. I have someone who I know who's young and who he's in his 20s, and I think he's not really interested in thinking about the world as a complicated reality such as it is today, and has decided that the best thing that he needs to do is just set up a business, have his family, not think about anything. He doesn't care about anything. He's really gonna just vote for, on every level, the most Republican and the most conservative way possible, so that he can just get his tax break. And he doesn't care about principles, he doesn't care about helping other people, etc. And that, in a way, is a kind of an extreme form of behavior, which, when you think about it, will keep things very much the same. It's not about changing anything. It's about getting what you need in your own life, here and now. And that's the program that many people sort of seem to, in the extreme world, look to. And I mention all this because when you think about extremes, as I say, there's that kind of comfort that comes with it. The comfort that you don't have to try and figure things out anymore. They're already figured out for you. Now, that applies, strangely enough, to a lot of different kinds of philosophies. Philosophies can be incredibly simplistic things because they have a way of putting the world into abstract ideals that themselves are, by their very definition, somewhat simplifying. Coming into the 20th century, it was discovered that most people's real motivations for behavior in life were not just culturally determined. It wasn't just about being puritanical and paying attention to your chivalrous and other ethics of the time, but that, in fact, in addition to all of that, you had an additional problem, which was unspoken for, wasn't seen, which was that people were having a number of normal human impulses that could not be expressed in these very formal and rigid societies. And this led to sexual repression and weird behavior that could not be explained because its causes had to be hidden. This is, for example, why, Sigmund Freud, coming into the 20th century, began to do his studies in hysteria on the basis that many women who came to him would break out into sudden crying and didn't really understand the reason for that behavior. And it turns out that they were hysterical, as it were, because they were really deeply unhappy. And when you're in a world in which your way of living has to be so controlled, then no one's going to tell you that the world is wrong, but rather that you're wrong. And then going through that, we tend to introject and feel within ourselves the difficulties of the world. We can't express who we are, and we become deeply unable to live free, let's put it that way. And that's what sort of has happened in that world. That led to the world as a kind of model of secret depression, a secret sadness, the melancholia, the difficulties that are under the surface but are all still there. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not there, etc. Those kinds of ways of seeing the world really fundamentally, I think, dominated psychology from, again, 1900 until much later, probably around the 1970s, when an entire kind of strange reaction against that took place. And that was what I would call, and many people have already, the self-help movement, where the solution was to be found not in getting inside yourself and finding that real sadness that the world had hidden, that culture and behavior didn't allow you to express and understand within yourself as an individual, but rather the opposite, where in fact you were okay all along. And books came out with these incredible titles that really spoke to a claim that held up this sort of claim, or this idea that you were never really wrong, that you were always happy, the happiness is always inside yourself, and that if you just spend a little bit of time to just consider it, it's really there. In fact, these titles like I'm okay, you're okay, or all I ever needed to know, all I need to know I learned in kindergarten, or like winning through intimidation, which is like, or looking out for number one. And so the idea was that everything that you ever needed to know was already inside your grasp if you would only realize how simple everything was. And in a way, that's a kind of extreme that led to the self-help generation of the 1970s to imagine itself as a kind of simple way of designing a new cultural attitude. That attitude that said, yeah, sure, I'm going to be able to get everything I want. I'm going to be able to find happiness. It's really not going to cause me that much problems. All I have to do is be able to believe in myself beyond whatever it is that culture or convention or history has expected of me. That's really not so bad, but it's another form of simplification. So on the one hand, we have this world in which there's doom and gloom, sadness, because we have these hidden desires and difficulties. And then on the other hand, which lead us, which rule us, which dominate our behavior, let's say. And then on the other hand, we have this opposite sort of world in which what we're looking at is really the opposite, the complete contrary version of that, which is, all we have to imagine is that we were really lucky all along because everything was just so simple. We were making it so complicated. Why did we have to do that? Life is fine. And between those two extremes, neither of which is considered a viable description of the world today for most people, the self-help movement continues to sell books, movies, and create its own sort of impulse. But it's not what it used to be. I mean, in large part, people have realized that is a simplification. And the whole other depressive idea of the whole Prozac nation is also not really considered the way that most people really live. In fact, I think that the belief system out there is that most people understand their world to be somewhere between those two, much less clear. much less obvious. That, you know, no matter what happens, you have to work hard. You have to do the things you have to do. And that no one's going to come and solve your problems for you. And that no belief system is going to make everything so simple. I think that's fine to believe that, because I think that's much more close to the reality that we experience in our daily demands. Now, the reason I say all of this is because those are not helpful ways of thinking today. But instead, I think we have to think about is how to solve the practical management problems of our day, and how to deal with people who are just as difficult as anybody else has always ever been, and that the challenges, financial and otherwise, remain the same. I think that very few people would ever speak about the middle. I think of Chantal Ackerman's film, Jeanne Dielman, which is a horribly boring film because it shows the life of a woman in the 1970s in a sort of real-time version. If she had to take a shower or wash herself or do anything, it would take just as much time to show that in the film as it really did in real life, for example. The idea being that most people's lives, women's in particularly, were ruled by a kind of day-to-day doldrum that was difficult for them. It was hard. And so between the end of hope, meaning hysteria, repression, depression, melancholy, in other words, that modern moment when by about 1900 serious psychology begins, and on the other end, the end of despair, meaning pop psychology, when by about 1970 it ends, serious psychology that is, between these 2 points we have the elimination itself of realism, the middle ground where people truly live, moments without pointed edges, moments in between other ones, and so on, in a continual succession like a road without signposts. That's realism. It's not when things are seen to happen, but when they're actually in preparation for happening. And that's why I think that this in-between time often seems boring. But although it is real, is it meaningful? Is it art, for example? Well, I think of Roland Barthes referring to the importance of having readers remain fired up by the texts that they used to read, that they wanted to read, that they enjoyed reading. Boredom was for him, for Barthes, the poison of meaning, because as he put it, to be bored means that one cannot produce the text, cannot open it out, set it going. So boredom, as that space between the extremes, say, of joy and sadness, or between fullness and emptiness, is the boundary between life, which produces it in an infinite quantity, and art, on the other hand, which seems to avoid it infinitely. So I think when next we might feel that sensation, the sensation of boredom, we might perhaps want to see what's outside the reality of artistic being and what's inside the real in itself. Boredom is evidence of one's being in preparation for some kind of fiction, which is to say, an extreme of some kind whose trail is going to be left behind by some character of a memory. So I think there is meaning in boredom. It's an in-between space, and it's a very real one. It's one where even art dare not go. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that, and thanks very much, and until next time.